It looked like a normal tragedy. A young mother of two, suddenly gone at just 32 years old. Her church community mourned. Friends cried, and neighbors described her as a kind of mom who was always smiling, always involved, always the one who made others feel seen. To almost everyone, the explanation seemed tragically simple. A heart condition finally caught up with her. A silent electrical failure inside the heart. A natural medical event. A heartbreaking loss, yes, but nothing more. But beneath that calm surface, something darker was hiding, much darker than anyone imagined. At first, the medical chart told one story. The obituary told another. And the man closest to Stacy, the husband who should have been devastated, seemed to be already living in a different world, one with plans that did not include the woman he had once promised to love. In time, investigators would discover that what looked like a medical mystery was actually something far more intentional. But the most unsettling part was that for nearly a year, nobody noticed. And in the early days, the case would have been forgotten forever if one single, determined parent had not refused to accept the official story. Because everything began to crack when one mother, Stacy's mother, made a single phone call. That one action turned the story from a quiet tragedy into one of the most disturbing and calculated cases North Carolina had ever seen. On the outside, this family was a picture of stability. Stacy Robinson Hunsucker lived in Mount Holly, North Carolina, and people who knew her described her as gentle, loving, and genuine. She had married her high school sweetheart, Joshua, and together they had two young daughters who became the center of her entire world. To friends, they were the couple that seemed easygoing and wholesome, the parents who took photos at the beach, went to church events, grilled outside with friends, and tried to keep life simple. But behind that friendly image, something was beginning to change, slowly and invisibly. Stacy's health began slipping in ways that confused her doctors. Strange episodes would appear, disappear, then return without warning. Her heart rate would drop dangerously low. Her blood pressure would fall for no reason. Nothing in her medical history predicted this, and nothing in her lifestyle explained it. Her friends saw her smiling on social media, but behind those photos was a quiet pattern, medical episodes that no one could diagnose and no one could correctly explain. At first, everyone assumed it was some kind of rare internal issue, something genetic, something hidden. Meanwhile, her husband, a medically trained flight paramedic, was by her side. He understood altered vital signs. He understood medications. And he understood how unusual it was for a young, otherwise healthy woman to suddenly begin experiencing repeated cardiac events. Eventually, Stacy's condition worsened to the point that she became dependent on medical devices that people her age would never expect to ever need. Even then, there were still no clear answers, just mystery after mystery. And yet, when her heart finally stopped for the last time, people accepted it, because the story seemed believable. A woman with known heart struggles. A tragic ending. Doctors believed it. Police believed it. Everyone believed it. Everyone except her mother. But this was only the beginning, and what happened next would begin revealing gaps, contradictions, and details that did not match what a grieving husband should have done. The smiling marriage that hit early cracks. From the outside, Stacy and Joshua looked like a classic small-town love story. They met young, grew into adulthood together, and built a family that seemed tight, loyal, and steady. Friends described them as playful and supportive, the couple that never raised their voices, the couple that brought snacks to softball games, the couple that posted beach photos like everything in their life was perfectly organized. Stacy loved teaching preschool. She loved painting wooden signs, making crafts, and posting photos of her daughters. She was deeply active in church groups, community activities, and family gatherings. She was the type of person who tried to make holidays feel special, even when life was busy. Joshua, on the other hand, carried a very different role. He had a strong background in emergency medicine. He trained as a flight paramedic and worked with medical air transport crews. He had played college football. He was physically confident, and he was a kind of person who could talk his way through anything. People described him as highly persuasive, the type who could speak calmly in chaotic moments. That detail, his calmness, would later become one of the most disturbing parts of this case. Because while Stacy was living inside her quiet storm of unexplained health problems, Joshua seemed to be living in a separate reality. He spent weekends working extra shifts, going out with friends, and appearing unusually comfortable, even when his wife's medical condition should have been frightening. People close to Stacy began noticing that something felt off. But at the time, no one could have described it clearly. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't one big clue. It was a feeling of distance that no one knew how to label yet. The signs were subtle, but the separation had already begun. And in the middle of this, the family experienced strange cycles, moments of calm followed by sudden medical emergencies. Hospital visits where doctors could not explain what was happening. Time away from work, stress, confusion, and eventually an entire household that started slowly drowning in financial pressure. The happy photos continued. The friendly posts continued. The church event continued. But behind all of it, something was growing. Something no one could see yet. And it was about to show itself in a dramatic way. When Stacy's health crashed so severely that doctors were forced to make a decision that would change her life forever. Mysterious collapses and financial pressure. The first major collapse happened after the birth of Stacy's first daughter in 2013. What started as strange faintness and low blood pressure soon escalated into a pattern of medical emergencies that did not match her age, her lifestyle, or her health history. Doctors were confused. They ran test after test, blood work, cardiac scans, hospital monitoring, and nothing pointed to a clear medical cause. Every time the medical staff tried to trace the pattern, the results looked like random chaos. Then another major collapse hit. Then another. Within 2 years, Stacy's heart problems became so extreme that doctors made a decision that is almost unheard of for a woman not yet 30 years old. They implanted a pacemaker. A pacemaker is not something a young mother with no inherited heart issues would normally receive. It is a life-supporting device, something given when the body's electrical system fails. In the medical world, this would have been a dramatic neon warning sign. But at the time, no one saw it for what it really was. To her friends, this simply looked like a bizarre medical tragedy, one of those rare cases you hear about sometimes. The kind with no clear diagnosis. The kind that terrifies families. And while Stacy went from appointment to appointment, trying to understand why her body felt like it was shutting down, something else was happening in the background. The medical bills started piling up. House payments became tighter. Groceries, gas, unexpected medicines. Every expense began cutting deeper. Friends from church created a fundraiser to help. The community tried to provide support. But no amount of kindness could erase the bills from emergency care, specialists, surgeries, and recovery. Then, their house burned. The fire destroyed their belongings, emotionally and financially. One tragedy after another. One disaster laid on top of another disaster. To the outside world, this looked like a family being crushed under the weight of terrible luck. But in reality, this sequence was shaping something else entirely. It was forming a timeline that would later matter greatly. Because each mysterious hospital visit wasn't random. Each fainting episode wasn't a medical coincidence. And every unexplained collapse was actually building toward an ending that was already being prepared, quietly and methodically. And when Stacy finally died, the strangest clues weren't found in the hospital records, or in her medical history, or even in her financial struggles. They were found in her husband's behavior. And the first red flag was visible almost immediately after she took her final breath. The behavior that didn't match grief, and the first red flags. On the day Stacy died, Joshua called 911. His story was simple. He found his wife unresponsive, leaning against the couch. But as hours passed, that single moment began shifting each time he told it. He told one person he stepped outside to check the cars. He told another friend he went for a short walk. He told someone else he was cutting wood in the backyard. He told Stacy's mother he was working at the kitchen table on his laptop. 4 different accounts. 4 separate explanations. And yet in each version, he always made sure to mention that Stacy was unattended when he found her. Still, police accepted the initial explanation. She had a known heart condition. She had a pacemaker. She had years of unexplained cardiac episodes. So the simplest conclusion appeared to be her heart finally failed. No autopsy required. Case closed. But this is where the first major shift happened, because Stacy's family expected an autopsy. Stacy herself had signed up as an organ donor. under normal circumstances that would have made an autopsy automatic and routine. Yet Joshua refused it. He insisted there would be no autopsy at all. And within 48 hours, Stacy's body was cremated. It was all done with remarkable speed, faster than anything the funeral home staff or the hospital team expected, faster than what most grieving families are even emotionally capable of organizing. While the family was in shock and trying to understand how a cheerful mother with 2 young girls could be gone so suddenly, Joshua began moving forward like a man with no hesitation, no pause, and no emotional paralysis. Then, within that same extremely short window, he filed claims on 2 life insurance policies totaling around $250,000. At first glance, this could have been interpreted as standard paperwork. But very quickly, the pattern became unmistakable. He refused an autopsy. He rushed a cremation. He filed large insurance claims immediately. He appeared distant, calm, and emotionally unmoved. And when Stacy's friends and family began noticing how quickly he seemed to shift into a new routine, a routine that barely acknowledged Stacy, they started to feel unease. There was something unnatural about the way Joshua acted. Not devastated, not broken, not wounded, almost relieved. And that unsettling feeling would only grow stronger, because while the community mourned Stacy, Joshua's life began changing rapidly, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. A mother's instinct, and a call that changed everything. Months passed. People expected the grief to eventually catch up with Joshua, that one day he would finally break down under the weight of losing the woman he built a life with. But that never happened. Instead, he appeared more energized, more free, more focused on a future that did not include the past. He quickly grew closer to another woman, a co-worker named Jennifer, and their behavior raised concerns among multiple people who witnessed it. Friends described them as openly affectionate, planning new living arrangements, and acting like they had already built a new household. Meanwhile, Stacy's mother, Susie, watched all of this, and something inside her refused to accept the official explanation. She had spent years watching her daughter suffer through a confusing medical decline. She had seen the sudden death come without warning. She had witnessed a rushed cremation and the refusal of an autopsy. Something didn't add up, and while the official cause of death was listed as heart failure, Susie refused to let her daughter's story end there. So in May of 2019, 9 months after Stacy's death, she made a phone call that became the turning point of the entire case. She contacted the North Carolina Department of Insurance, not the police, not a doctor, not a hospital, insurance investigators. She told them directly that she believed Joshua had caused Stacy's death for the insurance money. That single statement triggered something far bigger than a routine fraud inquiry. Her call was immediately transferred to a criminal investigation team. And that team began doing something local authorities never did. They started questioning the story. And during that review, they made a discovery that almost no one knew existed. Because even though Stacy's body had been cremated, something had survived. A preserved blood sample from the organ donor screening. It had been quietly stored, untouched, simply because Stacy had been registered as a donor. It was the only remaining biological evidence, and investigators now had a chance to examine it. That blood sample, unintentionally preserved, became the piece of evidence that changed everything. Because when the specialized toxicology results came back, the truth wasn't just suspicious. It was deadly. The toxicology shock and what was really inside Stacy's body. When forensic toxicologists analyzed Stacy's preserved blood, the results did not match anything related to natural cardiac failure. Instead, the sample contained a chemical most people would never imagine as a murder weapon, tetrahydrozoline. It is the active ingredient found in common over-the-counter eye drops. Most people use it to reduce redness in their eyes. But in large amounts, it becomes extremely dangerous. It can cause blood pressure to crash, heart rate to plummet, and the body's electrical cardiac system to fail, especially in someone who already has compromised heart function. A person would not accidentally consume high amounts of this chemical. You would not absorb it randomly. It only enters the bloodstream in lethal quantities if someone deliberately gives it to you repeatedly, and the level detected inside Stacy's blood was not just slightly elevated. It was measured at nearly 30 to 40 times higher than what would ever be considered normal exposure. That finding alone would have been alarming. But the medical experts noticed something even more significant. Typical toxicology panels, the standard test hospitals run, don't screen for tetrahydrozoline, meaning someone with medical knowledge could weaponize it quietly. They could administer small doses repeatedly. They could create a slow decline that doctors would misdiagnose. And if used correctly, the victim would appear to die from natural heart failure. A death that looked tragic, but not suspicious. Investigators realized that someone who worked as a medical professional, someone trained in patient vitals, someone who understood pharmacology, would know how to use this chemical in precisely this way. That profile pointed directly toward Joshua. He was a flight paramedic. He had been trained in medications, cardiovascular emergencies, shock, and cardiac rhythms. He knew how to alter vital signs. He knew how to mask symptoms. He knew what doctors would assume and what they would never check for. And investigators began re-examining the entire timeline of Stacy's decline through a new lens. Her mysterious episodes, her sudden collapses, her pacemaker, the unexplained medical chaos. All of it now lined up with repeated exposure to this exact chemical. The medical mystery was suddenly not a mystery at all. What looked like a tragic natural death now looked like a long, calculated poisoning. And once investigators connected those dots, they prepared to move forward. Because with toxicology in hand, they now had enough to escalate the case beyond suspicion and toward an arrest. The arrest and a pattern of escalating danger. On December 19th, 2019, authorities moved in. Joshua was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, not just insurance fraud, not just financial crime, but intentional homicide. The accusation was clear. Prosecutors believed he had slowly poisoned his wife to death and had done so for money, freedom, and a future with someone else. But the arrest was not the end. It was only the beginning of what investigators began to see as a growing pattern, a pattern that showed this was not a one-time act. It was a progression. Because even after Stacy's death, and even after charges were filed, Joshua's behavior became more reckless, more extreme, and more disturbing. After posting bond, he was released temporarily, and instead of laying low or showing remorse, he began showing signs of hostility toward the very people who stood between him and control of his daughters, Stacy's parents. He followed them. He photographed them. He mailed them messages urging them to back away. He appeared at public places where they were present, making sure they saw him. This was not the behavior of a grieving husband trying to heal. This was the behavior of someone trying to intimidate witnesses and reshape the narrative. Then, another bizarre incident occurred, a staged kidnapping claim. He contacted authorities and claimed that he had been attacked, tied up, and injected by an unknown assailant. He even tried to blame Stacy's own father, implying that her family was behind a supposed attack. Investigators examined the story. There was no evidence, and eventually the stage scene collapsed under scrutiny. But the most alarming moment, the moment that revealed how far the situation had spiraled, was still ahead, because evidence later suggested that Joshua allegedly targeted his own daughter, exposing her to harmful substances. This was not speculation from tabloid whispers. This claim surfaced through documented medical testing during a hospital visit. Authorities became convinced that he tried to harm the child as part of another attempt to manipulate the investigation, possibly to suggest that someone else was a threat. And when this incident came to light, Joshua's bond was revoked. He was taken back into custody. By that point, investigators had multiple indicators pointing in one direction, that Joshua's behavior after the initial crime did not calm down, it escalated. That escalation painted a picture of a man not only willing to end one life, but willing to destroy multiple lives if it meant protecting his story. And as investigators pieced everything together, another unsettling element entered the timeline, one that occurred shortly before his initial arrest. An incident involving fire. And not just any fire. A fire set inside a medical helicopter. A fire in the sky, and the unraveling of control. Weeks before his December 2019 murder arrest, there was another event that investigators later folded into their timeline. A fire was set inside an Atrium Health medical helicopter, a chopper used for emergency medical transport. The incident occurred shortly after midnight. A syringe pump was ignited while the aircraft was in operation, causing the pilot to conduct an emergency landing at a vehicle lot. No patient died that night. No crew member was harmed. But the danger was extreme, and this incident took place not long before investigators placed Joshua in custody. When authorities later examined his behavior, the timing raised serious questions, because this was not an accident. It was determined to be intentional fire setting, a calculated ignition in a highly sensitive environment. If the helicopter had lost control, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The aircraft could have crashed, and multiple lives could have been lost. This wasn't the act of someone panicking. It was the act of someone who was trying to create chaos. Someone who was trying to shift attention, shift narrative, and possibly derail investigations that were closing in. With all of these elements combined, the poisoning evidence, the life insurance timeline, the refusal of an autopsy, the rapid cremation, the new girlfriend, the shopping spree, the harassment of Stacy's parents, the fake kidnapping, and then the fire, prosecutors began to see a chain, not isolated events, a sequence, a pattern, an escalation that did not begin or end with the death of a spouse. It painted the picture of a man who was not just trying to escape accountability, but trying to maintain control through manipulation, through misdirection, and through fear. And as of late 2024 and early 2025 reports, Joshua remained in custody with no bond, facing possible trials scheduling into 2025. Meanwhile, the custody of Piper and Willow became the focus of legal battles, with Stacy's parents fighting for the girl's future and stability. The case was no longer about a heart failure. It was no longer about a medical mystery. It had become a window into how someone could quiet a crime behind the appearance of natural decline, and how a single preserved blood sample could destroy an illusion that nearly became permanent. This case is a reminder that not every tragedy is what it appears to be. Sometimes, the most dangerous harm is a kind that hides behind routine, disguises sickness, explained away by symptoms, and buried under medical confusion. Stacy was a mother who loved her daughters, her church, her crafts, and her community. She was not supposed to become a headline, and she was certainly not supposed to become an example of how a slow, methodical poisoning can be mistaken for fate. It took one mother's instinct and one preserved blood sample to uncover the truth, and because of that, this case will never again be seen as a random heart failure. The silence was broken, the evidence was found, and what was hidden under medical explanations was finally revealed. Justice is still in motion, but one thing is certain. Stacy Robinson Hunsucker will not be forgotten,